I'm Gene, and this is Perfect Flow. I'm a New Zealand-based athlete and coach focused on optimizing performance, health, and well-being. While I have a professional background in biomedical engineering, I've chosen to follow my more immediate passions for running, endurance, adventure, movement, nutrition, lifestyle, community, psychology, and personal growth. My goal in starting this podcast is to connect with bright minds to extract the information I need to live a life that makes sense and feels good, and share those conversations with others. Apart from your favorite podcast app, the best places to follow my work are perfectflow.nz, genebeveridge.nz, and Perfect Flow on Facebook. Hello, Gene here. Welcome back. I hope everyone is well. Today I'm sharing my conversation with Alastair McDowell. Alastair has been a good friend of mine since high school, where we met through running, and I tried to get him into orienteering, and that was part of the path for him, but he has long outgrown short distance racing and short distance pursuits to take on much longer alpine treks, as you'll hear, and some extremely long climbing pursuits. He's done Capitan a number of times, and yeah, I had found this a really interesting conversation, and just hearing about his trips and how experienced and confident and talented he has become is just crazy, because we really started in the same place, and it makes me wonder, I would love to do these things, but I just haven't put the time into getting the skills, and he's really left no stone unturned since university, and has just kept pushing at all these different pursuits, and can report back to us with some amazing stories. So I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Alastair, welcome back to New Zealand.
Oh, thanks. Good to be home.
Yeah, I was really interested by that comment you made about what country you would rather stay in. At least I seem to be at a similar position as well, after just romping around for the past year. How long have you spent romping, we could say?
I've been romping for 4 years now. I moved to Australia straight after my master's degree in engineering, and then lived there for 3 years, and 8 months of that was in Canada for a stint. I returned to Australia and then got bored there, so I moved to France for a while, and then I've just moved back from America. So 4 countries in 3 years, and eventually it wears you out.
And do you find that those countries you felt less at home in? Or has it just been on the road?
Yeah, that's something you don't expect when you move overseas, how different it is to just living in your home country, just in terms of opening bank accounts, getting driver's licenses, visa requirements, getting a rent at a house, the currency exchanges, all of those things. Eventually they make you feel slightly less welcome. And the people I met overseas, of course, are very welcoming, but you still always have this slight hint of being a foreigner.
Yeah.
And it does take an unexpected amount of time to settle into any new place. So you have to either commit or move on, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's what I've noticed the most. I keep doing 6-week trips to Europe for orienteering, and the times I've tried to stay with the Europeans over there, it was great for your sport. You just dive in and go hard with the club stuff over there. But I've always felt like a New Zealander in Sweden or a New Zealander in Norway. I've never really gelled, and that's some of the experience some of us have had. Some people not so much.
Well,
but some people who have lived there have just felt, oh man, I just never clicked. You don't realize how many mannerisms and inside jokes we just get until they're gone, until you just don't get the jokes because they're, Swedish jokes.
Yeah, I mean, I think as New Zealanders, we're very lucky that everywhere you seem to go, as soon as you say that you're from New Zealand, there's always a look of surprise on their face, and their eyes light up. It's because we have just, I guess, positive associations.
A good rep.
With beautiful country and all that, Lord of the Rings, etc. And people love your accent. You're made very welcome. But certain things, like when you're in France and your French isn't fluent. You can have a conversation, but you can't actually express the Kiwi sense of humor over there.
Yeah.
And in America, people just don't know if you're being serious or not. Even
What
Australia.
is sarcasm?
Is he being sarcastic? I can't really tell.
Yeah, that's so true. That's interesting that you've noticed it as well. Do you think you'll be staying back in New Zealand for some time?
Yeah, for now, I think I've come back indefinitely. At first, when I was living in Australia, coming back to New Zealand felt like a step backwards in life. Like I'd continually been moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I've moved forward to France and Canada and America, now it feels like I'm moving forward in a full circle.
Interesting.
I always thought eventually
it's the
I'd come back
upgrade,
to
not
New
the
Zealand.
regression.
Exactly, it's a full circle.
Yeah, I think I'm tending towards the same thing. Maybe it's that stage of life I'm trying to focus more on certain projects that I want to see progress in. And I've just noticed that the more time I spend on the road, the less those things tend to happen.
Exactly,
So
and
there's a balance there.
You never have the true sense of community that you do when you live in one place for a longer period of time. So that's what you miss.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you have a lot of amazing experiences as you travel around, and so there's pros and cons, but there's definitely different phases for each. And there's always a phase to settle down eventually.
Yeah, and for you, that's Christchurch.
Yeah,
you feel like that's home now?
Christchurch is where I have most of my friends from old. They've seemed to be congregated there now, and has, in my opinion, the best access to the mountains and all the best adventure opportunities.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a place I'd love to live if we get the chance. We haven't quite found the opportunity yet, but it would be super cool. Sweet. So for those of the listeners that don't know you quite so well, let's wind the clock back a bit to your introduction to outdoor sports. And I guess that's where I met you, is just running at high school. You were just into running, but I don't know when the flames really started burning for the more extreme adventure stuff. Can you let us into?
Yeah, so I
into where that
started into the outdoors. As a child, we always went camping and mild outdoor activities, but I was never really into outdoor sports until fourth form, when doing tramping in Duke of Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a history of running in my family. My cousin Nick Willis is an Olympic athlete.
Heard of him? Anyone heard of him?
He's won a few Olympic medals, but that was always in my family, so of course I would try running, but I never really did that well in school running, so I found myself entering, city half marathons, things outside the school system, and eventually got into trail running, and that's where I really got hooked, doing the exterior trail runs in Riverhead.
Yeah.
I just remember 20-kilometer SAS style mud bash and covered in gore scratches, and I was hooked after that. And through the end of high school, I started doing longer runs like round Ruapehu and Taranaki and the Hillary Trail. Things like that really caught my attention. Outside of a competitive environment, I really enjoyed the most.
Do you recall that first time that you went somewhere more extreme, like Central Plateau, up around the mountains? Do you remember that moment?
Well, actually, the first year of university, I joined the Auckland Uni Tramping Club snowcraft course, and there was a 3-day mountaineering course on Ruapehu. And there you just learn ice axe, crampon skills, and that's where I started to look at mountaineering. And each year from there on, started to do steeper mountains. The next progression is Narahoe, and then Taranaki in winter.
In winter, yeah.
Yeah. And then eventually you realize there's a whole list of mountains down the South Island. I remember just tramping up to Mueller Hut, and a family friend showed me Mount Cook up the head of the valley, and he said, one day,
one day, boy.
And so that passion was always there for mountaineering as well as running. And eventually I realized I couldn't go any further without rope skills. And I'd never done much rock climbing, but eventually I took up rock climbing and realized it's quite fun in its own right. Just learning how to place gear and trad climbing, and doing multi-pitch trad climbs in the South Island. And one summer, a friend, Owen Lee, he took me for my first real mountaineering trip, which was west ridge of Malte Brun up the Tasman Glacier. I remember just being gripped the entire day. I didn't really know much about trad climbing at that point, But
Can you explain the subtleties there?
so Mount Brent is a 3,000 meter peak, and it involved steep snow, climbing some of it with no rope. Eventually we got to the rock and started climbing together with the rope along this ridge, placing gear, putting slings over rocks, and
Right.
classic mountaineering style. And the exposure was just something I'd never witnessed before. And
Exposure
it was
just
gripping.
Just to how high you are, and you can
1,000-meter drops either side of this ridge. That was a full immersion experience. And after that, you start getting a bit of a pat in the back from your friends, and you say, "Wow, yeah, that was an amazing experience."
Do you feel that, and maybe you noticed it then, or maybe it's something you've realized is the case now, that sense of presence when you're really engaged with your environment? Is that something you notice when you're there, compared to being home, where my brain is like just all over the place? I can spend a whole day up in the mountains and just forget totally about the world.
Oh yeah, when you're in a dangerous environment, you're so focused and you don't really think about a lot else. It's just the next handhold.
Yeah.
You're very...
And with ease, like you don't have
Yeah.
to work to get the concentration going.
No, it's forced upon you.
Yeah.
And you're often in dangerous situations, but the level of focus, you feel in control. But you do have to work hard to manage that risk. That's what I like, is using your brain to keep yourself safe as much as possible.
Yeah, and just someone like me who doesn't understand how you've done the ropes and doesn't understand all the little holds you've used, it looks just totally ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
It looks like you're just don't have any sense of self-preservation, but perhaps you have more sense of self-preservation, and you know exactly the techniques you've used to set yourself up.
I think the important thing is a slow progression into it before you start to get into life and death situations. So it's just like putting a toad in a pot with cold water and slowly cranking the temperature up. And it means when you start to get into more serious mountain climbs, you're aware of the risks and you're not outside your level of ability, because you have to be equal in a lot of different skills, fitness, having the right equipment, having the right skills, and having a bit of mountain wisdom. So all that comes slowly, and you have to gain it gradually rather than jumping in the deep end.
How old were you when you did that first reasonable mountain?
That would have been 21.
Okay. Right.
But I was definitely a follower there. It's a big difference to being a follower to being a leader.
Okay. So you had a good group of people who you were keenly sucking wisdom from.
Yeah, usually it was mostly the Auckland University Tramping Club and ORAC, Auckland Uni Rock and Alpine. That kind of university volunteer vibe, sharing skills, that was really good in the university.
Yeah. Cool. And what happened to your other sports around that time? Were you just really pushing that, or were you still doing some endurance stuff? When did you head up your first ultra?
It was always a mixture of mountaineering and running. I've kind of juggled the two a lot. My first ultra, it was probably when I was 19, running 100 kilometers along 90 Mile Beach.
Oh yeah, I remember you deciding this. You're like, where is the easiest place to do 100 kilometers?
Yeah.
Most people are just thinking like a road, even if it's just Tamaki Drive, like back and forward a little bit.
Yeah.
But you wanted maximum monotony, it seems. You wanted to feel the exact same footprint every step for 100 kilometers.
It's quite an amazing experience, actually, running along a beach for 100 kilometers. Always only being able to see 5 kilometers into the distance.
But
that was a friend, Jeremy Minton's brainchild. We had a 60-year-old teacher at school who'd done Oxfam Trail Walker. And we thought, well, if she can do it, we could probably do 100 kilometers. But after that, it was things like the Hillary Trail, the 75-kilometer trail through the Waitakeries, and around the mountains, 70-kilometer runs. I never really did any ultra races. They're quite popular these days in New Zealand and overseas, but I never really raced that distance. It was always more about the adventure, and the least contrived, the better. So running around a mountain has a sense of
it does, doesn't
purpose.
it? Yeah,
it's a circuit,
Yeah.
Or a mission to traverse a a mountain range from one side to the other. It just happens to be 80 kilometers long. So
Yeah,
that's
there's
what
something
what you have to do.
I just find it so much more engaging, and I'm like torn all the time whenever I'm trying to do a run and it's supposed to be 3 hours and I've never been to this place before, and I want to do a loop somewhere around something, and I don't know the trails, and it makes no sense to try to do a loop. Like one in 10 times I get horribly lost trying to do a loop. But I just cannot resist. I just want to pull it off. I just want to wing it, even with
You want to
no
feel
map.
like
What is it?
you've achieved something.
But an out and back doesn't cut it. Why does an out and back not cut it?
A 20-kilometer, 1.5 hour, or whatever it is. For me, it was never about training per se. Training was in just enjoying being outside. I never followed any training plans.
Mm-hmm. How did that feel doing the 100K, and when you did Hillary Trail in Auckland? How did you? I mean, you didn't have a coach telling you how much to eat and how to pace it. You're obviously in touch enough with your body and not completely ignorant about what the human body's requirements.
I was just out for a rip, as the Canadians would say. But yeah, I mean, I surely lacked some guidance and the most professional way to do things. But for me, that just maximized my own enjoyment, because it was the self-sufficiency, and you would always learn things from those around you. I always ran with other people and learnt, and often went to races to support other people, so I could see what other people were doing.
Yep.
But in terms of the training, it was always a feel, just thinking, as you're running through the weeks, how do you feel? Do you think you can do that distance? And then just go for it.
Yeah.
It was a very laissez-faire style. I don't recommend it to everyone.
Yeah. But just to be in touch with your body does really make sense.
You have to feel your body and not overexert yourself, because I have been in situations where I've injured myself doing silly things like a city marathon, road marathon, off insufficient training and not being able to walk for a week. So we all make silly mistakes eventually, and you do need consistency in order to be able to wing these things.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And like, you're someone who has been so consistent over the years. You're always chipping away at something active, whether it's just getting out and tramping or doing some running, just always keeping the metabolism going, always keeping the legs going.
Yeah, I think that keeping your activities really varied. Like over the years, I've done things with adventure racing and like long mountain bike rides and a bit of kayaking, mountaineering, which is just long days on the feet. So all those different activities, and also rock climbing, I think is the key to staying uninjured. It's harder for people who have just one singular focus. I think they can do that, but they just have to be a lot more careful that they don't, with that repetitive exercise like running 6 days a week.
Tell me about it.
You're gonna be a better runner, but you have a higher chance of being injured. So I kept my activities varied.
Yeah, and that's what it looked like from my perspective as well. I didn't see you doing focused running training yet. Like with envy, I saw you like knocking off these ridiculous runs. But of course, I'm not paying attention to the fact that you went out and doing all these other adventures that are kind of off my radar as running sessions. But you're still working your lungs and your legs and still mowing through the energy. So
yeah, I mean, with mountaineering trips, you're often doing 12, 18, 24-hour days.
Yeah.
I mean, when we went to Patagonia last year, the first trip was a 24-hour push, and then it was 30 hours, and then 37 hours. So those kind of ultra endurance days is what I think gives you the ability to do all the other things.
If that doesn't teach your body how to use fuel properly, then nothing will. So when did you first find adventure racing as a sport?
It was at the end of university. I did the Three Peaks run across Ruapahu, Ngauruhoe and Tongariro with Sam Clark, you probably know. And he was thinking of starting a Godzone team, but he eventually had other plans, and he recommended me to some guys in the South Island, Tim Farron, Losh Nuttall, and Emily Wilson, and I had a great opportunity to join those guys for the Kaikoura God Zone down in
And they wouldn't have been
Kaikoura in 2014.
Yeah, were they big names back then? Perhaps not. Perhaps
They
emerging.
had done
At least
the
Tim was still
previous,
emerging.
yeah, they'd done the previous two, and Tim was an excellent orienteer, and Emily had done coast to coast several times, and Elisha was also very solid.
Yeah, because
So
they're
those
big names
guys,
now.
yeah, those guys were solid. So I learned a huge amount from them. That was my first real adventure race, I think. And we had an amazing experience in that Kaikoura race. I think we've been crossing Tapuao Nuku and biking down the Molesworth and crossing some
Oh, it was great to watch.
random terrain in the middle, canoeing down the Clarence. I think we came 8th in the end. It was a huge surprise.
Yeah.
They were dragging me half the time.
Yeah. I remember us.
Sleepless
us
nights.
just cheering you guys because that was that was much closer to the top than we were expecting for some young bucks.
Yeah.
Very
We were
inspiring.
all average age of, I think, 22 at the time. or
Yeah, that's
23.
incredible. A sport designed for old dogs, and these young dudes come in here and shake things up.
Well,
That
Tim
was
had
super
some
cool.
incredible ideas. Like, he found a solution to carry our kayak paddles in the bike box from the very beginning so that we could get them out at the start of a 40-kilometre trek before the Clarence River. We carried these split kayak shafts over the mountain range so that we would have them on the 100-kilometre canoe stage. So instead of using the really slow canoe paddles,
Oh,
we had these split shaft carbon fibre.
yeah, I've got a whole box of them right here.
Yeah, exactly. Grassy knoll outdoor. And that sped us up hugely for that 100-kilometre canoe down the Clarence.
Sneaky.
I think the only other team to do that was, what's the team? Seacrest?
Don't know them so well.
Nathan Fave's team.
Oh, it's a Seagate back then.
Seagate.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if they're doing it, then there's something to it. 'Cause,
Exactly.
yeah, they only take on the best possible techniques. And I interviewed Stu Lynch as well earlier on this, and that was pretty incredible to hear some of the stories from him from a long career, and interesting comparison just to you starting. Did you know those guys when you?
I'd heard
when
of.
you kind of got into it.
I've heard of the names, but I only really dabbled in adventure racing. I did the God Zone the following year with a different team, the Wanaka Queenstown version, and I changed from the follower to the leader more or less in that round, and I realized how challenging it actually was and how much there is to learn. After that, I moved to Australia and had to sort of give up adventure racing for the time. But I really enjoyed that experience.
Yeah. Have you done any since?
No. I mean, traveling and living in different places, it's so hard to keep all that equipment, to keep up training with kayaking and mountain biking. It's so difficult.
Yeah.
I think Christchurch is one of the best places to be based for that.
Are you keen to get back into it over the next few years?
Potentially, yeah, because Christchurch just has such amazing varied terrain for mountain biking and running and kayaking that it just makes sense to combine the three for multisport or adventure racing.
And the hub that's down there now as well. There's just so many people training all the
Exactly.
time. Everyone's realized it, and everyone's stronger together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though the next God Zone is up in Rotorua.
Yeah. Now we've got the North Island version, which would be quite cool. So, can you talk us through your entry into climbing and how you managed to go from tramping to, the Transalpine traverse you did, that like whole month mission in the South Island, and to also do things like El Capitan. That is a lot of things have to happen before you get to big trips and big climbs like that. Can you talk us through what that looked like from your perspective? Were you, thinking of El Capitan years ahead, or are you just like, this is fun, this is more fun, this is hard, I'm getting better? How did it work for you?
Yeah, so it is a long progression. I probably didn't do my first outdoor sport climb until 2012. But then that summer in Christchurch, I really got into rock climbing and climbed all around Christchurch's Port Hills, in Arthur's Pass, and out in Charleston, and down in the Darrans, in Fiordland, and just had a whole summer learning about trad climbing, and coming back to Auckland, just training that craft. I was always more into the trad style, which is when
you explain the difference?
Trad climbing is when you place your own gear, so you have cams, which are spring-loaded devices you put into cracks.
Right.
And
So they look
nuts.
like kind of like scissors at one end, and they've got like some mechanism in,
Yeah,
and then you let go, and they like
they expand
hold themselves into the
a
crack.
crack. Yeah,
Yeah.
using a camming action, and you have to carry one of every different size, from a finger width to a full fist size.
Right.
And so
It's not
as
a
you're
one-size-fits-all
climbing,
cracks.
you're looking at the cracks around you. So you have to climb slightly fractured rock, or cracks that are continuous, and you have to select, using what equipment you have, which cam or which nut, which is like a metal chock. You have to select what will fit in the crack, and sometimes it's not good. So it's a lot of mental aspect there, and a lot of thinking ahead. And that's
Is
the more
that dangerous?
adventurous style.
Do you have any
mean,
big incidents
The
with
thing
that?
is, it can be dangerous, of course, but with trad you can put as much protection as you like.
Right.
With sport climbing, there's pre-installed bolts into the rocks, so you have to just use those bolts where they exist. But the thing is, with trad climbing, you usually climb at a lower difficulty than your maximum, so you actually fall off less.
Okay.
With sport climbing, you're falling all the time.
Right.
And if you're not, then you're doing something wrong. You're
Right.
not trying hard enough. So, yeah, you keep yourself safe by choosing the level of difficulty. But that allows you to climb in the mountains and to climb new routes, which of course don't have bolts. So you can go do longer multi-pitch routes. And then eventually you can set your sights on things like El Capitan, which is mostly trad on cracks. But with climbing, it was coming along okay, but then I heard about this thing called the New Zealand Alpine Team, and that's where it really got started for me. I applied to that, and what it is a 3-year mentoring scheme for young Kiwi climbers, and there's roughly 6 to 8 mentors who are basically some of the best mountaineers in the country, teaching you all of the skills of alpine climbing.
Wow.
So alpine climbing, where you're combining the skills you have on pure rock, and then you learn ice climbing, where you protect yourself with ice screws that you screw into the ice. And then you combine the two, which are called mixed climbing, which is where you have to climb rock covered in streaks of ice and snow, basically what you see in a real
Gnarly.
mountain.
Yeah.
You're climbing rock often with ice axe and crampons. And we learned that skill down in the Remarkables. Every year there's the Remarkables Ice and Mixed Festival. So that's above Queenstown. You have super easy access to all this incredible mixed climbing terrain. And that festival, anyone can go, and that's the best place in the country to learn real mountain climbing skills. And they do clinics every year. It's in August.
Is that just like up the Queenstown facing slope of the Remarkables, or is there somewhere kind of round on the top that's like a really good location?
You take the Shadow Basin chairlift. You walk up.
Okay, so you go up to the ski
walk
field
up
access.
to the top of Shadow Basin, which is a remarkable ski field, about an hour, and then you walk around to the west side. So you're overlooking Lake Wakatipu,
You are overlooking it. Wow.
and there's basically
It's like one of the best views in
dozens.
New Zealand.
It's amazing as soon as you pop
So
over.
good.
And there's dozens of like multi-pitch mix routes from all levels of difficulty. So
Wow.
that's where you learn that skill. And so you're placing that rock gear into icy rock, and you're climbing snow, and you're learning how to move together. All these alpine skills that you can then apply to the real mountains.
Are those routes the same each year?
So
I'm imagining
the conditions
ice,
vary.
How's the ice gonna like? You set a route one year, the rocks are gonna stay there.
Yep.
But is the ice gonna form in exactly the same place?
No, it's not, and that's the wonder of climbing the mountains. Every year it's slightly different. So the classic route, Friday's Full, is pretty reliable as far as ice goes, but every year it's slightly different. So you have to assess the ice quality.
Yep.
but you're often using a combination of rock and ice, so you can always make things work. So the conditions do change, and there's ice climbing at Y Creek, which is a 2-hour ski over the Y Saddle, and the conditions there vary every year, and you have to be there at the right time in the season, usually August or September. So that's where we learnt the skills of the New Zealand Alpine team. And then there were 2 training trips. The first was to Canada, which is like the mecca of ice climbing.
Okay.
And so we spent 3 weeks there learning how to climb steeper ice and pure waterfall ice.
Wow.
So in New Zealand, you don't have much of it all.
So it's just like a
Frozen
big curtain of frozen ice.
Waterfalls. Yeah.
Smooth as well?
Yeah, so the textures vary on all of them. There's the Weeping Wall, which is 5-minute walk from the road, and it's 100 meters wide and about 50 meters high, at least.
Wow, just a big curtain of ice.
Thick curtain of ice.
Wow.
And halfway up, there's a cave. There's lots of different routes, but there's a cave with a pillar coming down. So you're climbing these chandeliers. So when you see on your roof in winter, if you live in a mountain area, you have, icicles. But on these frozen waterfalls, there's so many icicles all merged together. And so you're climbing these, it's like a chandelier. And you often have to smash off the loose ones in order to climb the most solid. And
I'm worried about these things falling on you. You
Yeah.
knock one of them off and you get impaled by its neighbor.
Well, yeah, you've probably seen some videos on YouTube. So you have to be pretty careful.
Yeah.
But you're usually only climbing quite thick, like, big tree size pillars.
Yeah.
And it needs to be thick enough that you can put ice screws in. But sometimes you have to climb with no protection for a while until you get above the breaking point of that icicle. So it can be scary.
Yeah, because that's what I'm concerned about, is how do you attach yourself to this bit of ice? Because I'm imagining you there, swinging an ice axe into one of these things, and maybe it just goes chunk in and you've got a hole, but maybe the whole thing shatters like a piece of glass. I'm not sure what ice does.
You have a very close feel with it. It's as you swing into it with your axe and kick into it with your crampons, you kind of feel it, and you can feel whether it's hollow, and sometimes you get dum. And sometimes if there's been big temperature gradients overnight, then the ice goes into tension, and as you swing into it, you break that tension, and the whole thing just pulls apart a bit and cracks, and you get this boom.
Okay.
And it could be unnerving. If you ever have that, you just climb
But they
down
don't
straight away.
explode like tempered glass when you
No,
break it.
because you're often climbing
Not that much
ice
tension.
which is so thick, and you stay away from really delicate features unless you're out for a suicide mission.
Yeah.
But the funny thing with ice climbing is, as dangerous as it seems, you actually almost never fall. Whereas you do with sport climbing, you fall all the time because you're pushing it. With ice climbing, you're always very in control. You never want to climb past that level of fatigue that you don't know if you can hang on to your ice axe any longer. For one, these ice axes have big handles on them, so you're holding onto a good grip, and you're often shaking your arms to get the blood flowing. And you can get, a little bit tired, but you have to be very conservative, because you don't want to get to the point where you can't even hang on to your ice axes. So,
And that's all you're using to get up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you are attached to your ice axes, but the worst thing that you'd like is to fall off, and then those stretchy leashes to your ice axes go into tension and then pull the ice axe onto you.
So say that again? Because they're attached to your wrist as well. So
no, your wrists are free.
Okay.
That was the old school way with leashes. Now we have leashless tools, and you just have some elastic cord attached to your ice axe just in case you drop one.
Right, so it's not going to fall,
off the mountain.
but you're not going to be able to hang on to it if you fall.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So you have to be careful.
Right.
And with ice climbing, it's quite a lot of effort to put in an ice screw sometimes. So you often have big gaps in between the ice screws. So you're never really
Is that like a
thinking,
bolt
I could fall now. No, that's when you're screwing ice screws into the ice.
Yeah, but it's like a temporary bolt, Or
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
So the first person places those and then makes an anchor at the top of a section, usually after 30, 40 meters. And then the second person comes up and takes those out,
Right.
unscrews them.
How long do they stand there for? I mean, a rock stays probably for our lifetime, but with these ice ones, can you use them for a whole day? Or once a few people have been dangling on these things, you want to take them out? How long do they stay good for?
The ice screws?
Yeah.
They last, I mean, you use them, they're only in the ice for a short amount of time. They're good as long as they don't get blunt. If you screw them into a rock, because the ice is too thin, they'll get blunt.
How long do they stay in the ice, strong enough, attached to the ice, so that you're still confident using them? I guess
I mean, they only need
kind of dynamic.
They only need to be good for the 5 minutes that you're above them until you place another one.
Right.
But they last for an hour.
Yeah. Okay.
Or more. I mean, as long as it's not sunny and melting out.
That's what I'm worried about.
Sometimes you put an ice screw in and water will gush out. No, they're solid.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I think it's a different world that at least a lot of us in New Zealand haven't had much exposure to. We've all seen rock climbing in a gym, and we all know where that goes once we see some videos of some guys climbing some big wall. But I don't know, ice climbing just gets very little exposure.
Yeah, it's a pretty niche sport.
Yeah.
And you have to really go to somewhere like Canada if you want to learn and become proficient. But the idea of that trip was so that we can then take pure ice skills to the mountains. And if we see a pillar of steep ice on a mountain, or even just a large swath of lower angle ice, we just have the skills to climb it much faster and with a pack. And then the next trip was Yosemite a year later.
Yeah, boy.
So that was all about learning how to big wall climb. Even though most mountains you don't use big wall skills, it's still you use like off derivatives of it. So basically we went to climb El Capitan and Half Dome.
Which for those who don't know is the hardest, the highest.
Well, El
what's the
Capitan,
exact title of that beast?
It's a almost 1,000 meter cliff of granite. It's one of the most beautiful rock formations out there. And you've probably seen Free Solo movie, Alex Honnold free soloing the free rider route. So it's incredibly beautiful, but also quite difficult. I mean, you need a lot of skills to get up the easiest route, which is, I mean, arguably the nose is the most popular beginner route, but that will take you 3 to 5 days. So the skills you need on top of normal rock climbing are how to Jumar. So that's climbing a rope which is fixed by the leader. So instead of climbing the rock with your hands, you Jumaring up the rope.
Oh.
So I'll explain the full system. Is the leader will lead the pitch, and if the difficulty is easy enough that they can climb it with their hands, they will. So for New Zealand grades, 17, 18, 19, or whatever you're climbing, you'll do that with your hands if you can. But once it's beyond that level, if you keep falling off, there's no point. So what you do is you use aid climbing. So if it's too hard for you, you put in a piece of gear like a cam, you attach a ladder to it, and then you're climbing up the ladder, and then you repeat that process till you get to the top. And sometimes the cracks are very small, or you might have to put a hook on an edge. So there's a lot of different techniques for aid climbing. That's a sport in itself.
Interesting.
But it's a way of climbing the mountain with any means necessary. Might sound like cheating.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about. I didn't realize that was part of the game.
I mean, to free climb, and free climbing is when you're only using your hands and feet with the rope as protection in case of a fall. To free climb the nose, only 6 people have done it.
Right.
Completely free. So all those sections that are too hard for you, you aid climb.
Okay, so but you're describing this as the easiest route.
Given to get to the summit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Given that you can use this aid climbing.
Yeah. So if you're a competent free climber, you could probably free climb half or 2/3 of the nose, and then you would aid climb the harder sections.
And
So
the
that's
harder
what we do.
ones are just more smooth. There's just less stuff
Yeah,
to
it's
attach to.
steeper, smaller handholds.
Yeah.
The cracks are thinner and more difficult. So we climbed that over 3 days. So every night you're sleeping on a ledge.
Yeah.
Or you can have a portaledge, but if you want to reduce weight, you just sleep on the rock.
Yeah.
And there's what you call El Cap Tower. It's a ledge which is long enough for about 10 people. It's really plush.
How wide?
It's probably, half a meter wide. So you're sleeping lengthwise across it. And I remember waking up that first morning on El Cap Tower, which is about 15 pitches up or 400 meters, and seeing someone do the king swing off the very top of El Cap above the dawn wall.
What's the king swing?
So that's where people set up a long rope off this rock jutting out from the top of El Cap,
Okay.
and they took a huge swing.
Not as part of a route.
No, just for fun.
kicks.
Just for fun. But above the El
Wow.
Cap Tower is the actual king swing, which is you climb up the side of this huge flake called the boot flake.
So a flake is something that's kind of detached
Yeah.
from the wall itself.
And it's shaped
falling
like
off.
a boot.
Okay.
So you climb up the side of that, and then you lower down. You clip into the top of it, lower down about 30 meters, and you need to get to a crack which is way out to the left,
Okay.
like way out, like 20 meters or something. So you have to do a run up, swinging across the wall, and basically shift a quarter turn in your harness
Yeah.
and run horizontally across the wall and grab onto this crack
Yeah.
or this edge and pull yourself over. The first time it took me about 5 or 6 goes.
And if you missed, you just kind of bumble your way back.
Yeah,
along
you
the
bumble
wall.
your way back.
Yeah.
And it's 35 degrees. You're dehydrated. You taste dirt in your mouth. You have to take a deep breath and then try again. So do a little run up and then just hurtle across the wall. So that's actually the crux of the whole thing, I think.
Wow. Yeah, that's
most
gone under the
difficult
radar.
part. Yeah. But
How-
there's
how
a lot
many
of
route-
different techniques.
Yeah.
for
And
doing
how
it.
many routes are there up El Capitan?
Oh, there's a ton, maybe
Yeah.
80 or more.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of these are hard aid climbing routes, so you're hardly doing any free climbing. You're just doing sustained hard aid climbing. So using really sketchy gear, hooks and tiny nuts and copperheads, all those sort of things. But there are roughly 7 or 8 routes that are sort of the trade routes that
So
people
when
do.
the media is reporting on some of these big climbs, that they don't often say what they never say what route has actually been done. Are all those guys doing a similar route? These are the top guys who
So
are
the most
trying to go
popular routes you'll have
faster and stuff.
heard of, the nose, that's where the speed records are done.
Okay.
So that's reported as the speed record on the nose. The other really popular route on El Cap is Freerider and the Salathe Wall. So Freerider is a slight variation to the Salathe Wall. The Salathe has some really steep cracks right at the top, which are 513B, grade 30, very hard. So
Wow.
some guys found a variation to make it easier, 512A, so grade 24 instead. So that's why the Freerider is now the easiest route to climb completely free, and that's why Alex Honnold chose that for his free solo. He didn't use any rope.
Yeah.
Those are the
just for
main
people
routes.
who are not aware of that, climbing a 1,000 meter wall with no rope.
Yeah.
Just people can put that into perspective.
Yeah, so we climbed the Freerider the year after, and every pitch you would just say to yourselves, wow, he free soloed that? That is ridiculous.
One slip.
Yeah.
Gone.
Some of the first slabby pitches just have almost no handhold. It's purely friction. Just friction.
So a
on
slab is
your
like a
tiny toe.
slope. It's not purely vertical. It's
So it's low angle,
So
but
you can
there's
kinda
almost no holes.
kind of run on your hands and knees a little bit.
Yeah, you're
but
just smearing your feet.
Yeah.
There's almost no handholds. You're just putting your palms into the rock. And so
trying to hug it.
any slip, you're gone.
Yeah.
So it's serious stuff.
But they've sussed this route.
Oh, yeah.
Every millimeter has been scrubbed and inspected, and
Yeah,
there are no unknowns.
exactly.
There's
You
as
would
few
have done it
unknowns as
50
possible.
or more times and knew it back to front. I did it actually a month ago, and we didn't have much time, so I thought we'll just do it in one day. And so that was like
1,000
combining the endurance
shit.
stuff with the climbing.
Mhm.
It becomes like a bit of adventure racing.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
you gotta
going
keep
through
moving.
the night. I mean, we started at 5 in the morning, and I had a friend who was keen to just Jumar. His name's Dave. Thanks, Dave. He was a legend, yeah, so he carried all the water Jumaring behind me.
Okay.
So that's when I would climb the pitch, fix the rope. He
Uh-huh.
would Jumar on that fixed rope,
Yeah.
which is using some clamps onto the rope to haul himself up, not actually touching the rock, really.
So that's a lot faster.
Yeah.
And given that he had all the gear,
Yeah.
if he'd have had to climb it himself, you would have
Exactly.
dropped him. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I would have had to belay him.
Right.
So we use a technique which is called short fixing. That's when you pull up all the rope, fix it to the bolts, and then you keep climbing, belaying yourself while they Jumar below.
Okay.
So you actually never stop. It's really fun.
Right.
If the level of difficulty is easy enough and you can just belay yourself with the Gregory,
Yeah.
you can climb while they Jumar.
Yeah.
And then once you run out of equipment, you use an extra rope to haul it up. They put you on belay, and then you just keep going.
Cool. It's
So
like
you
a
can just
support crew.
climb continuously
You're domestique, just
until
keeping you rolling.
until you get too tired.
Yeah.
So it eventually took 23 hours.
Jeez.
I really hit the wall and just crawled up the top half in the dark. Finished at 5 a.m.
Wow. That's incredible. And are there any other things that people miss out about these routes? Like we just get drip fed through the media when somebody's done something super fast, but what's the culture once you're there around climbing these routes?
Well, some things you don't realize, maybe how hard the top climbs are. I mean, that route that he free soloed, it's actually, you have to be an elite climber to do that with a rope
Right.
without falling. So some of the people don't realize actually it's not just scary, it's also extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
And is that just the smoothness of this wall? There's just not many features on it to hold.
yeah, there's certain sections which are extremely difficult. The hardest one is the boulder problem, which is like a V8 bouldering problem, which is extremely difficult.
Right. Like
In
there
its
are
own
people
right.
who are 1 meter off the ground
Yeah.
in a bouldering gym,
Yeah.
like struggling to do this
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult. And then maybe with the speed climbing on the nose, I think people probably don't realize how little protection they're using.
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen the film that's come out about that, but they actually passed us while we were practicing for the nose, and we saw them just basically running past.
Running up.
Well, I didn't look super fast as you watch them, but then you do one pitch as quickly as you can. They're already 5 ahead,
Right.
so that was pretty cool.
Just moving,
see.
just every move there's no space between.
Yeah. So we did the nose in 9 hours, going as hard as we possibly could. And these guys are doing it in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So they're doing that by placing such a little amount of gear.
Okay.
Yeah, they're having 20-meter run-outs much of the time.
Right. So that means if you fall
Yeah.
20, you fall 40.
Yeah,
Is that what you mean? You're right.
and
okay.
more.
Yeah. Ouch.
So yeah, you think
Shit.
that there's some special techniques to do it that fast. It's pretty simple. You just don't place much gear.
Okay. So they're definitely taking
to be very
more
confident.
risk to go faster as well.
Yeah.
It's not the same degree of safety that
But
you're
the
using
thing
going up.
is, risk is such a big topic with rock climbing. For most people to climb like that, it would be very risky. But for those guys, they have a different threshold. They have a different skill level, like an extremely high skill level. So for them, it's actually, for them, they feel that's safe. So everyone finds their own limits and climbs according to those. Some days you take a little bit more risk than other days in order to get an advantage. Just like on a running race, sometimes you take a bit of risk and
Yeah.
increase the pace by 10 seconds a kilometer early on to try and stay with the leaders maybe.
Yeah.
And that might come back to bite you near the end.
Yeah.
But if you want that achievement or that objective, you take a few risks.
Yeah. are some of these guys just like lacking some sense of risk that the rest of us have?
You could definitely say that the more exposure to these sort of hard climbs and risky climbs, it does sort of numb you to the risk eventually. But you also, at the same time, gain more and more wisdom as you go. So it's a bit of both.
But would you draw a line between like wisdom and confidence, or knowledge and confidence? Like I can definitely imagine someone having high confidence but being wrong about their skill. Are there some people who just come into this with way too much confidence and it takes like a massive scare for them to come in touch with reality again?
You have a lot of people have some experiences early on,
okay,
and then you dial it back a bit.
Right. So you don't learn that when you're at the height of your game. Given you've been climbing for 10 years, you've found reality at some stage.
But even at the height of your game, everyone can make mistakes, and you see every year the number of professional alpinists dying. You know, Uli Steck and David Lama and those guys. They're at the height of their game.
So experienced.
But they're just way out there. So you do have, eventually as you get older, each year you start to think harder and harder about what you want to do and what kind of risks you're happy with.
Well, why do you think the age matters?
I think it's just a wisdom, but also maybe your priorities start changing.
Yeah.
As soon as you have closer relationships, that actually influences how much risk you want to take.
Is it in the moment? Do you,
Ironically.
you're busy weighing it up, just thinking about yourself and the risk to yourself? Do then thoughts emerge about the other people who might be affected by a big accident here?
Yeah, for sure. You'd think that self-preservation should be the most important all the time, but it's curious how the brain works.
Yeah.
And if there's someone really close to you, like a new relationship, you find yourself wanting to take less risk because your priority is not to miss out on that.
Yeah.
And I felt that in my last trip to Alaska. We were climbing a big wall in the Ruth Gorge, and near the top, we're 200 meters below the summit. We're going for it, and there was some really melting snow, which was quite risky. Like snow hardly attached to a slab of rock.
Right, so the sheet could just slide.
Should we push it? But at the time, I was emotionally interested with someone, so I thought, no, actually, it's not even worth it. What's the point?
Yeah.
You have other priorities. So that you realize that on self-inspection, but really we should be like that all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
You learn these things about yourself.
Yeah, are we softening up or are we getting more real?
Exactly.
It's hard to
I
see
think
from the
as soon as you're to have kids, I'm sure your priorities change a lot after that, and the amount of risk you're willing to take in the mountains decreases.
Yep.
You're no longer just going for the summit haphazardly. You're thinking, actually, if it's not, a pretty sure chance, then let's just turn back.
Yeah, and I can imagine that some of these risky moments are not even on big or prestigious climbs. Can you think of some that are it's just you out on a mission, you maybe weren't even preparing to climb, and you just tried to get across some gorge or something? Have you had a few experiences that you were just like, okay, I'm glad we did it, I wouldn't do that again?
I know what you mean, because when you're on like an expedition overseas and it's the number one goal of the trip and you've invested a huge amount of time and money and effort to get to that point, you can be more invested, so you're willing to take a bit of extra risk. But when it's just a day-to-day thing, your risk tolerance will be lower, and so you say, no, it's not really worth it.
Yeah.
But I mean, even on just casual runs, occasionally you find yourself scrambling down a steep cliff and thinking, how did I get here?
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely had a few moments just hanging at the beach where got, oh, that looks like quite a nice sea platform to swim out to, and then you're climbing up some wall above like a sea platform with like big West Coast waves crashing,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're like, "What are we doing here?"
Oh, the
and
sea
you're wearing
is
jandals.
dangerous.
You're wearing jandals. It's
I
like,
stay away from the ocean. That is
Yeah.
dangerous stuff.
stuff like that. That your intention was never to do anything adventurous. You kind of just took one step and another step and another step.
Well, at that moment, it's just a fight for survival. Any means necessary.
Just because you had too many friends around you, got a bit cocky.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? What else are you thinking of doing in the future then in New Zealand? Oh, actually, can we jump back to the Transalpine
Yeah.
the mission? So that was 20, 30 days.
Yeah, so that was the end of university. I felt like before I got into any hardcore alpinism, I thought I should have a bit more of a foundation with just general mountain travel. And I'd read Graham Dingle's Across the Alps in 3 months in the middle of winter.
Wow.
And I always wanted to do something like that.
Yeah.
So we had a...
So that's like a north to south. This is not
He-
coast
he'd
to
done-
coast direction.
He'd done,
This is
so-
north to
he'd
south.
done south to north, but
south to
we
north, yeah.
eventually planned to do Arthur's Pass to Mount Cook, which is like a classic section of the Southern Alps.
Yeah.
Really popular, but a lot of people do it via more east coast valleys.
Okay.
Just a whole lot of chaos and moraine.
Mm-hmm.
So we came up with a route that was much more on the west coast and much more rugged west coast bush and glaciers. We came in from the Waimakariri, crossed to the start of the Three Passes route and into the Mungo, the Whitcomb, into the Bracken snowfield, and then over the Gardens of Eden and Alla.
Yeah, I'm most interested
Over
to
the-
hear about that because
Yeah.
that is a different world.
Oh yeah, these ice plateaus that we have in the Alps, they have this sort of mythical attraction for transalpine tramping because they're so hard to get to. And to traverse the full length of them is like this big goal. And so we're trying to combine those kind of
Right.
really unique places.
Because
These ice plateaus are just long tongues of snow and ice.
and
with
relatively,
glaciers plunging off the sides.
yeah, because we imagine the Southern Alps as a series of ridge lines,
Yeah.
but snuggled in the middle there is these flatter areas with these massive glaciers that are all quite high up, and I guess flat is
quite
relative.
pretty flat glaciers. You haven't seen them anywhere else. We've got a lot of them, like the Olivines as well. But the Garden of Eden and Alla, if you don't know, it's basically halfway between Arthur's Pass and Mount Cook, at the head of the Arifon, or the Clyde and the Havelock, and on the other side the Whataroa, the Perth. Sorry, might not be catching the place names, but yeah, it's very remote. It's almost as remote as you can get in the Southern Alps, and that was the goal, to feel this really deep sense of remoteness just being right in there. But we have it good in New Zealand that you can go into these places and not see another soul for weeks.
Yeah,
Whereas a lot of other places like the Swiss and the French Alps, they are so well developed and there's trails everywhere, there's huts everywhere throughout, and villages everywhere. You're never that far.
right. Even in
from
winter,
civilization. Maybe there are some more remote pockets, but I think in New Zealand it's very hard to get to these places. You have to go up these 30-kilometer riverbeds just to get to the start of them.
no road.
So that was a 5-week trip. By the end, we finished over into the Murchison and the Tasman Glacier and walked out below Mount Cook.
And you're just staying at huts, or are you setting up your own?
So
camps?
a combination of camping, but a lot of huts along the way. In Mount Cook area, there's the Tasman Saddle Hut and Murchison Hut. You can't use that anymore. But you're linking, all these valleys and huts and camping up high when you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you do some camping on? Can you camp on those glaciers?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The night before we crossed I can't remember the Murchison, into the Murchison from the Whataroa, we camped right below the saddle.
Wow.
And we didn't know if we'd be able to get over to the other side into the Murchison. we had to do one abseil off, smash some pitons into the grey wacky,
Yeah.
and leave them behind and abseil in, because we had some ropes for glacier travel, and we really weren't sure if we could get across to the other side. So that was cool. But yeah, you're having to be prepared for anything, so having tents is definitely necessary.
Yeah. What's it like waking up on those ice plateaus?
Oh, it's freezing.
Yeah.
And I actually carried a very light sleeping bag for the whole trip, only about 750 grams, to try and reduce the weight, light and fast. But the guys around me with their 1.5 kilo sleeping bags down to negative 20. And in the morning, your boots are frozen and you have to do a lot of packing up before you can get out and warm up. But it's beautiful, like when you get the freeze on the glacier, and you might have a full moon just setting before the sun comes up. The views you get, I mean, we climbed the Hofstadter Dome a few days later and watched the sunrise from the summit. And it was a really murky day, so we only got to see the sun for about 5 minutes before it disappeared into the fog. But the views from 3,000 meters of the Southern Alps are just spectacular.
Unreal.
You can't see any civilization as far as the eye can see.
Yeah. Well, what does happen if things go wrong up there?
I mean, you always have a PLB for helicopter rescue, but I mean, there's always self-rescue before that. You would,
Well, how big was the group?
3 of us, 4 of us, and then 3. One guy had to leave to get back to America. So yeah, you'd do first aid and lots of different safety, survival techniques. And when you're on these transalpine journeys, the beauty of them is that you do have a lot of gear, so you can survive pretty atrocious conditions. But these days I find myself less wanting to carry a 30 kilo pack and more wanting to just traverse these plateaus in one day.
Yeah.
And a few years ago we did that on the Garden of Eden. We crossed from Erefon to Hari Hari in just a bit over 25 hours. So then you are at risk of being exposed to the conditions.
If the weather turns bad
the
real
weather
quickly.
was pretty bad for the entire way across the Garden of Eden and Allah, and we're just in total whiteout on these flat glaciers.
Yeah.
Just following the GPS track. You'd be so lost without it. We're wearing all of our clothes. We're in running shoes and just micro crampons.
Yeah.
And a 30-meter rope between 3 of us.
True.
Just to cross the glacier. And
that's a different style.
Yeah, so that's what appeals to me more now, is you're not having a risk in terms of falling off, you're having a risk of being quite remote with not much gear. But the payback for that is that you can get across incredible landscapes in a much shorter amount of time. And so you just carry only enough food and just the minimum supplies, and then you can move fast. And I've always, when you have a running background, you always want to run. But in order to actually run on these mountains and river valleys, you actually need to be very light.
Yeah.
So you have to cut the gear down to
is not going to do it,
No, you have to cut the gear down to a minimum. So actually this weekend I'm trying to do a crossing of the Kaimanawas and the Kawikas. Something I've wanted to do for a long time, called the KKT, Kaimanawa Kawika Traverse. And I actually got rescued from that 6 years ago, trying to do it in a weekend. And we got caught in a ferocious storm.
Do I know that? I think I've forgotten. You definitely would have told me. Yeah,
it was not my finest moment.
Remind me.
We got rescued off halfway across the Kaimanawa. It was super remote. You're so far from a road end, and flooded rivers all around us.
Yeah.
And eventually we were getting hypothermic. We were just drenched to the bone. Even in our emergency bivvy setup, we had a tarp, but still just getting battered by the weather, so we had to call the chopper.
Yeah, this is with the PLB.
Yeah, here's hoping that doesn't happen this weekend.
Wow. Yeah, how many people were
That was
out
with
that day?
3 of us.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty embarrassing. I couldn't find any friends to join this time, so I'm going to go solo.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy being remote solo. It is kind of risky, but you just have to find a good weather forecast and back yourself
Yeah.
to go the distance, because it's about 90 kilometers.
Yeah, I definitely do find some appeal about being solo as well.
Yeah.
Don't tell my mum. But there's definitely something that I think this is what we were talking about at the start with your awareness and concentration and connection to what's going on around you just emerges to a level that I can't replicate anywhere else.
Exactly.
And
you
it
have
can...
high highs and lower lows. When you are in these spectacular places and maybe with some bad weather, you do feel this like unreal sensation
Yeah.
being way out there, just self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I mean, I love doing things with partners, and with climbing, it's the partnership of the rope, and you need your mates. But with running, there's just something about the flow. What's your podcast? Isn't this called the perfect flow?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm interested in getting at, is we managed to find these states of well-being beyond anything else we experience in some moments, and some people don't find them. I know you and I definitely find these states of flow and concentration, or whatever you want to call it.
I think, yeah, you achieve that when you're alone because you don't have to stop and wait, or you're not feeling like you have to catch up with someone else. You're just going the optimum pace for yourself. You just choose that pace that you can go continuously. As soon as you have to stop and wait, it just kind of breaks that flow.
Or even the consideration, like having to think about, are they okay?
Yeah.
Is this right?
You're just totally introspective. I mean, you could say it's selfish pursuit, but I mean, it does allow you to explore yourself and your own ability and do something completely self-sufficiently.
Yeah.
It brings great reward, and then you can share that with others.
Yeah, that's right. You can bring that experience back and either help other people work towards finding that for themselves, or even some people just want to hear about it and appreciate that it's out there, but not.
Yeah, I mean, you're only
suffering.
doing things like this very occasionally.
Yeah.
But it is, an amazing experience.
Yeah. And I can even feel that even just slightly off the trail.
Yeah.
Like I just have to go into Woodhull Forest far enough away from the roads, and for long enough after being out there just half an hour, I just begin to feel this. It's like my vision gets a bit wider. I like hear more kind of surround sound. I'm a little more, it's just birds tweeting.
Yeah.
But like I really feel like I'm hearing things from a more outside perspective. Things are just like kind of appearing from a direction that feels more from the direction, like a third person perspective, less about like the bird is to the left of me. I just feel like I'm moving through this terrain in a different way. And I don't know what your experience is like, but that's the best words I can put forth. I can just sit down out in this forest, and there's the sound of the wind of the trees, and there's birds, and there's some crackling of branches, and the way that comes through my mind is profoundly different to the way I'm feeling talking to you now. And it's very different to how it feels like in a city when you're kind of, there's interactions between people the whole time that you're trying to not bump into people, and you're trying to move away, you're trying to be nice, trying to not be anxious. There's all these things that
you have a greater connection for sure when you're not having to think about the other person, or you're not distracted by talking to them, or you just completely immersed.
Yeah.
So I think it's something we should all do occasionally, not all the time.
Yep.
But
that's really cool. Any other missions on the horizon? Anything else that?
I mean, I'm not one to pre-spray, but I've got a few plans. I mean, lately I've been experimenting more with this concept that I like to call trailpinism, combining trail running with alpinism.
Yeah.
And
when do we start?
You're in, yes, you're there. Well, I started trying it with this past summer when I was in Switzerland, on the Matterhorn and Mont Blanc, just getting basically just a very light ice axe and a very light pair of crampons,
Yeah.
and putting those in your running pack,
Yeah.
and then attacking these peaks which require scrambling and a bit of snow and ice.
Yeah.
Like the Matterhorn is just sustained easy scrambling. You don't need a rope.
Mm-hmm.
There's some fixed ropes at the top, but you need these crampons and ice axe for the snow and
Yeah.
ice.
It definitely suits me because I'm not interested in investing in all the gear all the time to get good at the climbing, but I do want to get high and I do want to run long.
Yeah.
And I do want to see and get that experience at the top.
Yeah, so if you enjoy running rather than trudging with a heavy pack, you do something like Mont Blanc in one day. It's incredible. Like,
Yeah.
you just start early in the morning, hiking up thousands of meters, and then you're on the snow. And instead of being in these big, heavy mountain boots, that is the key, is trading the mountaineering boots to running shoes where you can see that it's suitable. So for something like Mont Blanc, it's just easy snow. So you put crampons on your running shoes and you can actually run when it gets flat.
Yeah.
And you can move twice the speed, if not more.
Yeah. And how are you good with like
you can
steep,
run
with like just
down.
sheets of ice and stuff? There's obviously a certain gradient that you're getting too risky, but do you feel a great deal of safety if you do slip? You know, the ice axe goes in, you're not going to be sliding for 100 meters.
Yeah, you have to limit it to snow, really, frozen
Yep.
snow.
Okay, so
you
ice is
wouldn't
still
go on ice
risky. Yep.
because you're in running shoes. You
with
try
the
and find
small crampons?
slightly rigid running shoes, not super flimsy ones, but you don't have any front pointing ability, which is getting your first 2 points in. So you can only climb steep snow.
Right.
And the ice axe is, if you use the lightest one, it's Camp Corsa, it's aluminium, so it won't penetrate ice.
Yeah.
So you have to pick the terrain carefully. It's
And is there a bit of a
dangerous if you
merge
don't.
between snow and ice? I know when I tried to do that up Ruapehu a few years ago, it was in December, so all the surface snow is melted away, and it wasn't quite ice, but there was a stage where I couldn't kick through it anymore to make my footsteps.
Yeah, well, you get alpine ice forming when the snow melts and then refreezes
Yeah, it is
over and
that,
over again, and it forms much more than just frozen snow. So you can't, if you can't penetrate it, that starts to get too
Starts to
dangerous.
get dodgy. Yeah,
so you pick things that are just consist of 30-degree or less snow. So one thing I feel would be the perfect fit in New Zealand would be like the Northwest Ridge on Mount Aspiring.
Okay.
So it has like a 15 or 20 kilometer approach via the Matukituki Valley.
Yeah.
But you could just, if you're light enough, you can run all the way in.
Yeah.
You get to the waterfall face and then just get out a pair of hiking poles, boost on up to Bevan Col, put your crampons on, go across to the Northwest Ridge and then just scramble up it.
Yeah.
There's a bit of snow at the top. I mean, with the climate changing these days, people have been getting to the top of Aspiring.
It's going to get easier and easier.
And approach shoes without even touching the snow.
Yeah.
So why not just do the whole thing in running shoes and run all the way back down?
Yeah.
That's something I really want to try.
Well, we can do it in February when I'm down there.
Sweet.
So yeah. I don't have any of the equipment, but if you got some spare toys, then
I'll send you the packing list.
Yeah. Then Emmy and I are keen. Yeah, we're down there to
Petzl
exploring,
leopard crampons. I find work really well. I wrote it up on the internet. There's a blog called Trailpinism on the Alpine Team website.
A few other people
just
on the buzz.
Put some ideas down because it's like all this stuff is out there, but it's the combining all of it and actually applying it to things in New Zealand. I think you could do so many cool things in New Zealand with that kind of tactic, combining running with scrambling and easy mountaineering.
Yeah. Well, I'm keen and always keen to see what adventures you get up to next. It's been incredible watching you for the past 10 years. Take on every sport, every adventure sport imaginable, and just going from strength to strength. And it's really cool to hear you come back with wisdom and things to share. So
Still alive.
Yeah, really good to see you're still alive and still kicking. So hey, thanks a lot, Alastair, for popping round.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Yeah, it's been really fun talking, and I'm sure everyone will appreciate hearing this interview. And is there a place people can find you. I'll just leave some links in the
Yeah, I don't
description.
post huge amount on social media, but of course that's there. Instagram.
Yep. Thanks, Alastair.
Thanks.
If you're enjoying the Perfect Flow podcast and want more value from it in the future, there are some ways you can support it. The first is to rate or leave a positive review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or other platforms where it's available. The second is to share this podcast or specific episodes on social media or with friends. The third is to get involved more directly through the Perfect Flow page on Facebook, where I'm trying to construct a more interactive community. I want Perfect Flow to belong to the listeners, and if you tell me what topics you're most interested in, or even suggest specific guests, I'll do my best to make it happen. This is your opportunity to be part of something that answers your questions and adds value to your life. Another good reason to follow Perfect Flow on Facebook is that I post links to episodes, blog posts, and anything I find useful to this page. It's a great way to follow my training, racing, and learning. Another great way to stay engaged is to subscribe to beveridge.nz. This way you will get podcasts and blogs emailed to you, avoiding the clutter of Facebook. I don't know where this project will take us, but the reception so far has been positive. Who knows where we might be in a few years.